Hello, everybody. We'll get started in about 5 minutes, but I just wanted to make sure that folks can hear me. If you wouldn't mind, in the chat box or the question and answer box, just let me know that you can hear me. Can you hear me? If you can, just in the chat box, just type that you can hear me. Yes, I can. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, like I said, we'll get started in a few minutes. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Statistics Solutions webinar on Chapter 2, the Literature Review. Just a couple things before we get started. We do have a support person on with us who can answer any kind of technical related questions or basically non-content related questions. Also, the webinars are available on our website. They're archived on our website, and we do have a YouTube channel that you can access them from. Okay, so let's move forward. This is what we're going to talk about today, and these correspond generally with the typical sections of a literature review. You know, I do encourage that you get your, if you haven't already, the template, the dissertation and chapter template for your school. You're going to hear me say that several times throughout this presentation because that is your guide, right? Obviously, along with your chair. But the template is your guide for the chapters, for the sections, for the content. And so you really want to follow that. Because sometimes, even though there are commonalities, general commonalities in the, throughout, there are schools have sometimes particular requirements that are particular to the school. I would also like to let you know if you can ask questions while we're proceeding, type them into the chat box or the question and answer box, but I won't get to them until the end. But you're welcome to type them in as we proceed, so you can remember them if they're content related. Okay, so again, get your template from your school, see precisely what they want. But like I said, there are commonalities between the schools. Okay, introduction, literature search strategy, theoretical framework, review of the literature summary. So the introduction, like all introductions, you basically want to orient the reader about what you're going to be talking about in the chapter. So, restate, it's always helpful for the reader to restate the purpose of your study, remind the reader of the importance of your study, why your study is needed. This shouldn't take too long. It's not, really in depth. Really, again, it's just to kind of to reorient your reader, get them, back in the frame of mind to what your study is about, why it's important, what the purpose is. And you can also preview contents of the chapter if you want in the introduction. Usually there's a section called something like literature search strategy. Sometimes it's called different things, but it's basically the same thing. It shows your readers and your professors, the moves you made, the strategies that you undertook to search for relevant material for your study. It's always a good idea also, not only just to have the template for the school, but if you can get an approved example or two, approved dissertations of people from your school in a similar area, maybe doing a study that's similar. It's always helpful to get a couple of those as examples, because sections like this, for example, it kind of lets you see, in a concrete way, what people have done before you. So those can be helpful too. I recommend that as well. So what you really want to do in this section is you want to show your readers that you have conducted a pretty comprehensive search of the research material on your topic. So you haven't kind of left anything out. And so you want to describe how you conducted your search, which will show them, that you've done that. So obviously start off by saying that you've conducted a comprehensive search. Use your school's name. Usually you're using your online library portal from your school, which gives you access to academic databases and peer-reviewed material. List any databases and search tools that you used, like Academic Source Complete, Academic Source Premier, Google Scholar. In education, there's ERIC. In business, there's business search engines and business databases. So list the databases, the search tools you used. Any specialized journals, if you had to search any kind of specialized journals in your field, list those. You also want to talk a little bit about the key terms or your search terms that you used and combinations of them that you use for your search. And these will just kind of correspond to your variables and your major concepts of your study, right? So these are things that aren't surprises, and you shouldn't go on kind of outside of those. Stick with what you're doing, right? With what you're focusing on, what your factors are, your major concept, your variables. Those will be your search terms. And you can include any way that you qualified or filtered your search. So some of them include, maybe you just included articles and studies English only, maybe only full text. Two of the big ones here are coming later. One is peer-reviewed academic articles. I mean, that is the gold standard for lit reviews. I mean, people sometimes ask me what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Really, what you want are peer-reviewed scholarly articles. That's what you're reviewing. That's the research that you should be reviewing primarily. Sometimes you can include books. Sometimes you can include other dissertations, but I would do that sparingly and only if you need to. No magazine articles, no newspaper articles, unless you want to bring attention to something that is included in one of those, but you're not going to review it. Let's see, there was something else. Websites, no websites. I mean, if you need to go to like a government website for some statistics or something, that's fine. So use things like that very sparingly, if at all. But like I said, the gold standard is peer-reviewed academic articles, scholarly articles. So you definitely want to put in the way that you qualified your search that you focus primarily on peer-reviewed articles. Date of publication. Sometimes this is important, sometimes it's not. It depends on the school. Some schools want very recent studies and articles. Some say 3 to 5 years. 5 years is fairly typical, 5 to 7. They want to publish, this is the publication year in relation to when you're going to graduate or when you're going to end. So 5 years is pretty standard, 5 to 7. Sometimes it's a very tight window, like 3 to 5. Some schools open it up more, give you 10. Some schools don't have any requirements for the date of publication. Again, check your school's template, ask your chair if you're not sure. Generally speaking, though, and ideally, I would suggest sticking with as recent research as you can find. And the reason for that is, the lit review really gives you kind of a view of current and recent research on your topic. If you're reviewing something that happened, a study from 20 years ago, things could have changed in the research landscape in that time. If you're talking about a theory, usually sometimes you can quote older sources, but when you're reviewing the actual literature on your topic, my suggestion is to stay recent. But again, double check your school's templates. Some don't require them. Okay, but if they do, you definitely want to use, note that as a qualifier for how you conducted your search. Usually the theoretical framework comes next, but again, check your school's template. Some schools have a mention of the theoretical framework in chapter 1 and an elaboration of the theoretical framework in chapter 2. Some schools only have it in chapter 1. Some schools only have it in chapter 2. So again, see what your school calls for. So if they do want a theoretical framework in chapter 2, I guess the first kind of question is theoretical framework or conceptual framework. And just a good rule of thumb is the theoretical frameworks are generally more associated with quantitative studies, and conceptual frameworks are generally more associated with qualitative studies. So what do you want to do for this section? You want to state very clearly the theory that is, or theories that you're using for your theoretical framework, citation, who developed it, what year, what did they, you want to define the theory. Also, what did the researcher or researchers develop the theory to explain? A little bit about that. Like I said, define the theory. Sometimes theories have components. Define any associated components with the theory. Discuss what researchers have used the theory for, just to show that, people are still using it. Talk a little about what researchers in the past have used it for. And then it's important to connect it to your study. So how is it going to help you, the theory, explain your results? How is it going to connect to what you're doing? And again, looking at samples for these sections is really helpful. Another point here, and define the theory along with any associated components. I say use the theoretical foundation associated with your instrument or major concepts. Okay, so this is about theory and instrument alignment. So for example, this is particularly if you're conducting a quantitative study. So for example, if you're doing a study on emotional intelligence, right? So you're going to need an instrument to measure emotional intelligence. All the instruments and surveys, they all have theoretical foundations. So if you're using, and there's probably, I don't know for sure, but there's several instruments for measuring emotional intelligence. So if you use Goldman's instrument, you don't then use Myers' theoretical foundation. You see what I'm saying? So the theoretical foundation for the instrument needs to align with the instrument. So if you're using Goldman's instrument for emotional intelligence, you use Goldman's theory for your theoretical framework. Okay, so that's what I mean about that alignment. Okay, the theoretical framework too, another thing to say is, my suggestion is to keep it as streamlined as possible. And that doesn't mean simple. That just means if one theory works, fine, great. If you need two, if you're studying two constructs and whether they're related to one another, you may need two theories, one for each construct, fine. You start getting into 3, 4 and more theories, usually it's not needed, for one thing. Number two, it complexifies things. That means you have to discuss each theory. You have to define each theory. You have to talk about how each theory relates to your study. You have to talk about how each theory will inform later in your discussion chapter, how each theory connects to your findings. So keep the theoretical framework streamlined. Again, one theory, fine. If you need two, that's fine. But if you need more, there should be a really good reason why you need more. Right, conceptual framework, very similar, except that sometimes for qualitative studies, there may not be a theory that you can kind of rely on. So you may need to kind of bring in a couple concepts, major concepts that are associated with what you're doing, your topics, and kind of combine those to make your theoretical, or I'm sorry, your conceptual framework. But everything else still really applies about how to go about it, who developed the, who developed the concept, how does it help explain your topic, etc. Sorry. Okay. Review of the literature comes next. And this is really this is 80% of the lit review. This is where you're analyzing and synthesizing and discussing the research on your topic that's been conducted, and how it kind of relates or how it sets up the need for your study. So you want to cover, cover recent literature on your factors, your variables, major concepts, your topic, what you're studying. You're going to want to use headers or subheaders to organize the material, because it's going to be long. Again, it depends on your school. Some schools don't have length requirements. Some schools do. I've seen lit reviews be 10 pages. I've seen lit reviews be 80 pages. Usually the sweet spot is 25 to 30 pages, maybe 30, a little over 30. But some schools recommend 25 to 30 pages. So again, just see if your school has a requirement that way. So there's the point I want to come back to is there's going to be a lot of information. You're going to need headers, and not only is that reader friendly, right, for your reader to chunk out and section information so it's easier to understand. It's going to help you too, right? So you just don't have one giant lump of information to deal with, which is going to be difficult. So to organize, to identify your headers, I mean, these shouldn't be anything mysterious. These are going to correspond with your factors, with your variables, with your major concepts, right? If it's qualitative. So these are the things that you want to discuss in your lit review, the research on the very things that you're going to be studying, right? On your topic generally, and on the variables and factors and major concepts within the topic. So section your review of the literature portion out that way. They're all going to be different because all studies are different, right? But you do need to cover what your study is about, and it's in the specifics of what you're studying. So how do you organize the material? Okay, organize it by sections, like we were saying. Okay, now when we discuss the research, reviewing the material consists of synthesis and analysis. As we know, synthesis really just means putting things together, right? Synthesizing things. It's a combination of parts to form a whole. So combine information from studies to make your points. The basic unit to synthesize that is the paragraph, right? And when you do that, use standard paragraph organization strategy. This is going to take us back to earlier school, pre-college. Have a topic sentence. The sentences after that should be evidence or some examples or some discussion of the topic. And this will include material from the literature on the topic that you're reviewing, from the studies. You also, to help with synthesis, you also want to include where the findings of studies are similar to one another, or they're different. So Smith found this on your topic, but Jones found something else, or they they found the same thing. They confirmed. So you want to note the similarities and differences as you go through the research. You also want to note where there's a gap, or the gap, or how the studies are related to your own study. So-and-so conducted a study on what you're doing, but they left something out. They didn't focus on something. Hence, there's a gap there. That's what you're going to be doing. So part of the purpose of the lit review is not only to kind of review the literature to see what's been done and what's out there, but to also make the case that there's all this literature out here on the topic, but nobody quite covered what I'm going to be covering. And hence there's this gap or a need for that. So you always want to kind of drive that point home when you can. This is just a simple sample of, paragraph, right, with the topic sentence, the discussion sentences, and the summary sentence. It's very simple. It's just to kind of remind you, because I think the lit review is so big that sometimes people just get lost. They don't know how to organize material. And they start writing paragraphs with, 5 different ideas in it. So remember, use your headers that correspond to your factors and your variables. At the paragraph level, use the standard paragraph organization procedure. And these will be related to the points that you're trying to make, that you're pulling from the studies, right? So some things about the studies that we want to include information includes, details of the study. What was the purpose of the study? What kind of study was it? How did the researchers collect data? How did they analyze data? What did they find? Okay, so you want to include those kinds of details also, and see how the findings kind of inform or relate to what you're doing. Okay, so that's the synthesis part. The analysis part is, analysis is making a comment on something. It's just not a summary. It's evaluative. So analysis of the research can involve noting any kind of shortcomings or gaps, especially any gaps that highlight the need for your own study. You can note trends in the research. You also want to, again, at the beginning, at the end, especially, but throughout, reiterate your research problem and the need for your study. So especially if there's, a study that brings up kind of the deficiencies in the research or the gap that you're going to focus on. And again, overall, the review of the literature culminates in an argument for conducting your study. Here's the research that's been done. Here's all the things that it's focused on. Here's what it's shown. Yet there's still a gap here, and that's what your study will focus on. I know that's a lot to cover for a review of the literature. And part of it is just, again, getting a sample, seeing how people have handled it, sticking to when you organize it, sticking to, what your study is on the factors, specific factors, specific variables, the concepts that you're talking about, and the research that's been done on it. Okay, and the summary. Again, like all summaries, it should recap major points from the chapter. And specifically to this chapter, it should remind the reader of the research problem based on what is in and what is not in the literature. Again, reiterate that point, that here's what the research shows, but and here's what it doesn't show. Here's the gap, and highlight the need for your study, and it reinforces and reiterates the need for your study. And when you recap the major points from the chapter, don't do what I don't know what to call it, but I call it kind of a fake summary. People will just say, well, I did this and I did this, and they just kind of list the sections. And that's not really a summary. It's just listing the sections. So, do a real summary, recap some of the major points or some of the major trends in the research. Okay, and this is our contact information, our hours, our email, phone number. So you can contact us if you want more information, if help on the literature review or any other part for that matter might be right for you. It's a free consult. Also, we run webinars every week, sometimes more than one, on different chapters and different aspects and different topics of the dissertation. So check out our webinar schedule and see if there's other ones that might work for you. And I will turn it over to questions. If anyone has questions, just type it in the chat box or the question and answer box, and I'll be happy to help you if I can. Any questions? No questions? Everybody's got the lit review down? Okay, great. Oh, you're welcome. Okay, let's see, explain synthesis part again. Thank you. The synthesis part. Okay. Synthesis it's not a section on its own. It's just kind of what you want to be doing in part in the review of the literature. Part of it is analyzing the studies, and part of it is synthesis, which is where so in other words, you don't want to have Smith did a study on this, then Jones did a study on this, then Mendoza did a study on this. So part of what you want to do is put those studies in conversation a little bit, and not necessarily the studies, but the findings especially. Mendoza found this, but Smith found something else, or where the findings corroborate one another. So that's kind of synthesis, kind of putting things together to form a picture of kind of the research on the topic. Does that help? It's just part of that, what professors like to see in lit reviews, synthesis, analysis. So it's not just kind of, doesn't look like an annotated bibliography where you talk about one study after the other. You want to kind of put them in dialogue, so to speak, with one another, at least as far as the findings go. And also how those findings and how the studies relate to what you're doing. Anything else? Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I'm going to wish you luck. Again, check our schedule, see if there's any other webinar that might work for you. And there's our contact information. And thank you for coming, and good luck, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.